Once.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. It's so good to be here. And I'm just grateful that we have this opportunity to be together. It's a rare opportunity that we have as women clergy to be together. And thanks to Dr. Tomberlin and for Reverend Jamie Massey putting this together and all of the team who put it together. I'm just so happy to be here. I am semi-retired right now, so I'm what they call a senior professor. I only teach one class a semester. So right now I'm in Virginia at my daughter's house and my grandchildren, and they're in various rooms in school, and one's at school, and there are two dogs here, so you may see something come in. So I'll try to, but that's where I am right now. This topic about finding voice has intrigued me for a long time, and out of that understanding of why women sometimes have difficulty finding their voice, I put a class together that Dr. Hall has taken, and now I'm trying to talk her into team teaching this course with me. But I found that traditional homiletics courses or preaching courses are more designed for men, and they don't deal with the issues of authority and power and voice. And so many women come to seminary needing remedial help in self-identity, and your voice is a large part of that. So I want to talk this morning about finding your voice and the importance of that, and kind of go through that, and then we'll take some time for dialogue and questions together. Can everyone see?
I beg your pardon. I just wanted to let everyone know that while she's teaching, and if you have any questions, please place them in the chat, and we'll be able to field those at the end of her presentation. Thank you, and my apologies.
Yeah, yes, thanks. So we're just a few minutes together. I want to talk about women's voice and the practice of ministry. And what I have found is that we are here. Let me move this down here. I'll go to that. I've got two primary dialogue partners, Mary Donovan Turner and Mary Lynn Hudson. Their book, Saved from Silence, Finding Women's Voice in Preaching. And then the one that I really have come to love is a more recent book, Nancy Lammers Gross, Women's Voices and the Practice of Preaching. So these two books are my primary dialogue partners. So what is voice? Voice is something that is at the earliest part of our life, the very first cry that we take. It begins with breath, and it's the most basic act of life itself. Unless there's something wrong in our vocal cords or even in our hearing, so we can't hear the sounds, this life flow of air into the body and back into the atmosphere. It's all part of being human. To be human is to have a voice. And in the Hebrew words, wind and breath and spirit, all of these words kind of come out of that basic word, ruach, and that's a feminine word. So when you see the word ruach in Hebrew, that is a feminine term. And it was the ruach who brooded over the face of the deep and stirred up the primal waters. And it comes out of this breath of God and the Spirit of God. In order for us to have sound, the Spirit must meet and move the body's vocal cords, the wind of God. It's we take our first breath, and that breath of life that we are given continues every day. As long as we live, we receive this wonderful breath of life. We take it for granted, don't we? Like, I didn't wake up this morning and go, oh, I'm breathing. Wow. It's just something we take for granted. And it's that which goes over our vocal cords and comes way deep from inside our diaphragm and up. And but the brain is also involved. And this is where sometimes I believe things get messed up with women. because our brain may be telling us something, and our voice may listen to that and react accordingly, because our voice is a lot to do with our self-identity, and it's integrated into our body and into our brain. And voice has the capacity to bring forth the deepest and most intimate expressions of our soul. When we look at someone we love deeply and say, I love you, or when we're holding that newborn baby and we're doing those wonderful, delightful sounds to that baby, trying to encourage, it's called mirroring, trying to encourage the baby to make the sounds. And we get all excited when that baby starts making those first sounds back at us. So it's just such an intimate part of us, but it's also a very public part. And this is where women, I believe we are good at the intimate voices, the private voices, but the public voice, for many reasons, for centuries and centuries, women were not trained in public voice. That rhetoric was part of classical education from the Greeks on, and it was only given to men of high class. Therefore, we women were not privileged to rhetoric. As a matter of fact, women were told that silence was feminine, and that a woman speaking in public would be shameful. And that's part of the culture of patriarchy that we see emerging. And we see that in the context of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Miriam is a great exception in the Old Testament. And Mary's voice there in Luke 2 is powerful. But there is that whole context of women are to be silent and not to speak in public realm. And that went on for centuries and centuries and continues even to this day. And all of us, each of us has a distinctive voice. And, you know, as we age, our voice ages with us, but we can recognize someone before we see them by their voice. I hear my husband, a deep voice of his, and I know, oh, that's Jack. And I hear Dr. Hall, and I go, that's Arlene. So we know that our voice identifies us. The goal of being a fully functioning human being in the world requires that we integrate as we grow and as we develop throughout life. And we have what we call sometimes a childhood voice. It has to be integrated into the young adult voice, and the young adult voice has to be matured into the more mature adult voice. Now, in my book that Dr. Hall mentioned, 7 Transforming Gifts of Menopause, which I hope you buy, you can get it Pathway, Amazon. It's more like a book about what happens to women at midlife, but I have the first chapter on what happens to women at puberty. And I have a whole section on what happens to women's voices. And you may recall or know of a 7-year-old girl who can't stop talking, and she's kind of loud, and she owns the world. There are a lot of TikTok videos of these little girls, and they're just bellow it out in the back seat of a car. But something happens in adolescence where they say the voice goes underground, that women have these, you know, we all have these caverns deep inside us. And that 7-year-old, what's good at 7 is seen as bad at 13, 14. Guys won't like you if you're loud, and you need to defer, and you need to lilt your voice upward so not to be intimidating. And they learn this in middle school. Girls learn this in society and church, is that you go up. So that to go up means that you are almost like making a suggestion. Like I can say to my husband, dinner is ready. Or I could say to my husband, dinner's ready. And the latter one is, well, in case you want to, it's ready. And I'm not telling you what to do here. I'm just kind of, it leaves things open. And certain cultures, Southern cultures and California girl culture, and really accent that women should learn to lift their voice upward, so not to be threatening. And like Dr. Hall comes from Caribbean culture, and she was blessed not having been indoctrinated that she should kind of lose her voice in her throat or go up. And then there's the vocal squeeze that my students have helped me know about, where the words are squeezed at the end, sort of a millennial discussion thing, and it just drives me crazy with that. So the voice of childhood is sometimes lost. And what I call the young adult woman voice is sort of that relational voice, the honeyed, let's get along with everybody voice. But then around menopause and midlife, most women find that they that voice wants to come back, and there's all kinds of things that happen there, and you have to read my book for that. So women are often discouraged. They want us to keep that relational voice, and this more authoritative voice is seen as threatening. But the question is, how can you do ministry without an authoritative voice? You can't. No one will take you seriously. It's like everything you say is a suggestion, then why take you seriously? They will love you in some ways, but it's not that you will have this sense of authority. So what is voice with the capital V? Voice is entitlement to speak, the right to articulate one's viewpoint, one's perspective, whether you're preaching on a biblical text and when you stand behind the pulpit, are authorized by the church, by the Holy Spirit, by the pastor, by whomever, to have a viewpoint, a word on that text. And so when we talk about voice, women's voice with the capital V, it's more of the capacity to speak. And a lot of marginal groups throughout history are finding their voice today to speak. We could say Blacks are finding their voice. Indigenous Americans are finding their voice. Women are finding their voice. And that's the V, the capital V there. But the voice with the small v is that part of us that I was just referring to earlier, where there is the coming out of our body. And sometimes we struggle with this voice. Not only, oh goodness, we struggle with the voice with the big V, because we don't want to get labeled, or we don't want to be intimidating to people. But we also struggle with the small v voice. And Nancy Lammers Gross says that often, as she's taught women to preach, young women in seminary, that they struggle to speak, she thinks, because they are disconnected from their bodies, and that they have this sense of their body is their enemy, or their body has to be small and kept under control. And let me give you an illustration. I'm in a faculty meeting, and all these guys are sitting there, and they may go like this. They may lean back in their chair, and some of them have this sort of big belly, and they're going to say something profound. And they go back, lean back, and they pat their belly. And they're thinking about something deep. I've never seen a woman do that. Often I see women do this, like can I be small? How small can I be? How much can I shrink? So often we are disconnected from our own bodies, but we can't have a good voice either with the big V or the small v unless we are more fully embodied and we are a musical instrument, and we have not just the larynx and the mouth or even the chest and the lungs. We have the whole body. And some of the exercises we do in the class is stand with both feet flat on the floor and begin to speak. Take a breath and speak from your feet up, not from here up. Well, voice coaches train you not to speak, sing from here up, but I believe that beginning to see ourselves as a full embodied instrument. Luke Powery, in his book on preaching, has a whole chapter on full embodied preaching. He comes out of the Black Caribbean church, Pentecostal church, and he has a whole chapter on that. The preacher is a full embodied, and women in particular, we really need to learn this. But we know that people are looking at our body. We know that they're looking at what we have on. They're looking at how we move our body. So our bodies get scrutinized in ways that sometimes male bodies don't. So we often try to maybe shrink the body or try to hide the body or attempt to become disembodied, ignore that we're embodied. And none of those efforts are good. And Nancy Lemmers Gross says she's seen women, young women, who think nothing of belting out a song when they're on a praise team, just out. And she said, but take the same woman and put her behind a pulpit, and the voice sometimes is very different than the voice that she had on the praise team. Why is that? Well, I think that the space of a praise team is seen as more acceptable for women. Their voices can be heard there. They're part of a group. So they really are encouraged to kind of belt it out. But the space that you inhabit or your voice inhabits of the pulpit, or let's take the boardroom, or let's take another place where, women's voices may not be often heard or seen. Therefore, women begin to kind of shrink, and those voices become smaller in that sense. And it has a lot to do with the brain and telling us, are we authorized? But she says that she sees this almost like breathy, apologetic students. And there's this ever-present smile, or what's irritating sometimes is the inappropriate laughter at the end of a sentence. That's not like, why did you do that laughter at the end of that sentence? It's not called for. Or, as I mentioned earlier, the all-pervasive upward inflection. So helping women to have an authoritative voice is, stand in front of the mirror with both feet and begin to read or say something and start lowering your voice, go down. We sometimes think that if we raise our voice, that gives us more credibility. But actually, the lowering of a voice is the more authoritative sound. And women are an octave higher than men. So we have to work with this. And I don't say that we become men, But I want us to not get lost up in the clouds when our voice just sort of goes off up there and becomes somewhat disembodied. Actually, it does. It takes flight, and then it just becomes disembodied from us. And in order to overcome this as women, I think Pentecostals have done a good job with Joel 2:28. I will pour out my spirit, says the Lord, on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. We also look at Acts, but the problem has been among Pentecostals is that we do what I call the spirit overlay. And I've actually heard women say this, talking about self-hatred. I've heard women say, well, if God can use a donkey and speak through a donkey, he can speak through a woman. And I'm like, well, what did you just say? Can you believe what you just said? So there's the idea that women are inherently inferior in some ways, and that the spirit, though, comes on a woman and overrides, pushes the override button, and suddenly it's not the woman, but the spirit. Now, of course, when we speak and we are anointed, it is the spirit, but there's a more override expectation that it's almost like she's no longer the woman, but she's the preacher. But when you step out from the pulpit, the voice changes. Or so we've got to go into Genesis 1, not just Acts and not just Joel. And we've done too much hanging out in Joel and Acts. It's good, but we got to go back to where we are created as male and female, and that God's breath is given to male and female, voice is given to male and female, and God declared the woman good and calls women to make full use of that whole full-bodied instrument in proclaiming the gospel, and that she is in the image of God. The kenegwo, either kenegwo, the help sent, is often seen as a warrior sent to help. You know, we always say the woman is the helpmate. That's like somebody that is an apprentice and somebody that kind of helps you do things, but that's not the meaning of those Hebrew words. It's one who is compatible to face kind of imagery there in the Hebrew. And it's often the word used, Ezer is often the word used for God. God is our present help. So that doesn't mean God is our, even though some people treat God that way, is our little helpmate. But we are all the Ezer, Kenegwo, those who are face to face with men and are embodied fully and both fully equal in the image of God, so that it is not this, but this. And when we ground ourselves in Genesis, rather than just Joel 2:28 and Acts 2, we then can go to Joel 2:28 and become more fully empowered by the Spirit. But if you don't do the Genesis work on yourself, and sisters, that's what you got to do. I can ask women, are you you believe you're created in the image of God? Yes, but they don't really believe that. Deep down, they don't. And you've got to begin to grasp what it means to be created fully in the image of God. And then your body becomes a good instrument, a good place for the Spirit. The Spirit doesn't have to do override like a donkey to proclaim the gospel, because you are good and you are a daughter created in the image of God. So our body is a relational, dimension that we as women have to negotiate. And so much body insecurity that we inhabit today is that to say that we are good, that we are complete in the image of God. But all the advertising and everything around us says, but you could be better, and you could do a little do-over, and why don't you get those injections, and why don't you work out more? And it's just relentless, isn't it? So this body insecurity affects us as human beings, but it also, as ministers, it is projected out on that. And if we want to speak with a full body instrument, then we need to inhabit that. And by that, we mean that just love being in your body. Just love, your body's been so good to you from the moment of conception. And your body is the one that helped you crawl around and toddle and run and ride bikes and skip. And your body is the one that's helped you bring babies into the world if you have children. And your body is not the enemy. The body is the friend. And it's not something that we have to constantly be policing and aware of, but to join back with our body, I think, is an important thing. And so what we can say is, I have a female body and I have something to say. Those two things don't have to be dissimilar. We don't need the spirit to come in and say, oh, I know she's got a female body, but I can overwrite that. But the spirit can inhabit that fully. And a woman who's lost permission to speak her mind will not feel free to use her voice in an unrestrained way. And permission to speak is one of those things that goes back to voice with the big V. Where do you have permission to speak? And is your voice taken as seriously in various contexts as other voices or male voices? And most likely it's a struggle to have this. But the thing is, once you give yourself permission, you know that God has authorized you and given you permission to speak, you will find that you can just claim your time and claim your space and claim your voice. And our churches are full of permission to sing for women, but not so open at times with the permission to speak. And that's a lot to do with self-authorization. A whole nother session I could do on authorization ecclesially by the churches and how that affects the voice. We do need that. But if we don't give ourselves this permission and authorize that, then no matter what ordination we have or authorization we have, it is not authentic, and it is not, the word I want to use is authoritative. You can be utterly authoritative and not be authoritarian. Authoritarian is dictatorial, condescending, can be quite evil at times. But authoritative is, when they heard Jesus speak, they said, by what authority? So you can have an authoritative voice, and that also goes with an authoritative presence, because we're, a whole package here. And so many women have such low self-esteem or insecurity that if they walk into a room where their voice is needed, their voice is not, they sabotage it by just their demeanor, by, I know of a woman that years ago, one time she walked in my office and I think she said, I'm sorry 7 times before she sat down. And I just finally said, there's a moratorium here in this office. and you don't use the words, I'm sorry. You haven't done anything wrong. You just walked in my office. I'm taking up your time. I'm sorry. So there is this sense of giving yourself this authoritative presence that only you can give it to yourself. If you don't, others will certainly not give it to you. And even if they do, it's not going to be as effective. And we have the syndrome, and I have a whole section in my book on the nice girl. The nice girl is expected to grow up to be the good woman. But girls adapt to the pressure to be nice and kind, and they often lose their authentic voice to speak openly their truth. Women are often seen as setting up for a man to speak his truth and setting up, but to speak our truth sometime is not seen as nice. You know, there's the Southern dictum, just be nice now. And nice is not holy. The highest value is to be a child of God, is to be holy, is to be wise, is to be all these things. But I have never found the word nice in scripture. Really haven't. And therefore, you can be nice, but and you can. I think kind is a genuine thing, and being kind is, I believe, here more important. But nice, most of the saints I know, like the late Margaret Gaines. Margaret Gaines was not nice, but she was a woman of God, and she spoke her truth. She was a very kind woman, but she wasn't nice. So we have a facade of being nice, and the underground caverns that we have in our psyche, those deep down self, we have this rich world of ideas and visions and opinions and fascination with the cosmic battle of good and evil. But girls have a way, as Gilligan said, to go down, that part of themselves goes down into the caverns. Whoever writes young adult fiction these days and can tap into those girls' underground caverns of Vampire Diaries, Harry Potter, Star Wars, girls devour these books because these books tap into what went underground when they reached puberty, and this heroic self, the one who fights the cosmic battles between good and evil, and not the princess to be rescued, not the nice girl, but this more authentic, fascinating, deep self. So there is a conflict. Carol Gilligan talks about this, and Mary Pfeiffer, in her book Reviving Ophelia, she says that women sometimes have to choose between being an adult and being female, and they often choose to be feminine, female. So adulthood is women age. Again, back to my book, I talk about this. Women age, but they're not sometimes given permission to mature. The church, the society wants you to be sort of an updated version of your 25-year-old self. God did not design that. He designed us to mature. So being female and having a powerful sense of call and this fire in the belly is sometimes this conflict is found in our body posture, in our voice, in our struggle to be so agreeable that we don't want to offend. And therefore, that powerful sense of call, thus saith the Lord, this is the word of the Lord, hear this word. That is often mitigated out because we can't be sometimes this nice young woman or this good woman and this with the word. So we have to integrate ourselves into being fully female and all of the wonders of that, but knowing that that doesn't mean that we are constrained, or that we are we're more silent, or that we don't have the power of voice with the capital V. That's what we have to claim for ourselves, because no one will give it to us. And I had to learn this the hard way. I chaired a board meeting once, an ecumenical board that was Roman Catholics and Protestants. And I just sat there and kind of let it get out of hand, trying to be nice. And somebody spoke up and said, who's in charge of this meeting? And I said, I am. And he said, then take charge. And then there was a pastor. I was at a table at breakfast the next day, and he looked at me and he said, you know what bothers me a lot, Cheryl? And I said, what? He said, someone who has authority and doesn't want to use it. And I began to ponder my training in college and seminary, and how I had not been given permission in my ecclesial community to chair board meetings and to learn the skills that my colleagues had. So when I was on my sabbatical, the pastor who told me that about the authority gave me space at their church to live for a few months in New York City when I was doing research, and to shadow him, to watch how he conducted meetings. And I learned some things from this Presbyterian pastor. So we all fall prey to that, because many of us in the Pentecostal tradition, as women, we may have a prophetic voice, but we don't have a boardroom voice. We may have a prophetic preaching voice, but we don't have this authoritative voice. And we try to slough it off and be nice and joke and laugh. And then we get surprised when they don't take you seriously. But we have to work on it. I had to work on it a lot. I had to work on it. So the change to authentic vocal expression happens when a woman is able to be both herself, strong, grounded, authoritative, and also don't lose that relationship. Don't lose the kindness, the love, the care, and bring that together into this authentic voice expression. You speak with love and you speak with authority. Those aren't dissimilar. And I want to stop now so we can have time for some questions and some dialogue. I gave you a lot of stuff here.
So the two questions that came up in the chat so far has to do with the books.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have the name of those books again? The very first two books that you mentioned, and the book from Pew Luke that talks about the full body.
Oh, Luke Powery, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other one, it's let me get back to my PowerPoint here and give you time to. Now, keep in mind, one of these books, well, both of them. Here's mine. Don't forget my book, 7 Transforming Gifts of Menopause.
Yes.
That's an important. It's not just if you're at menopause or not. It's more about what happens to a woman through the course of her life. But the Mary Donovan Turner and Mary Lynn Hudson, Saved from Silence, Finding Women's Voice in Preaching, they're coming from African-American women's voices and minorities a lot. So, and they're mainline Protestant. So keep in mind that you're reading a mainline Protestant people in that. And it's a good book, but if you had to choose between the two, I think Nancy Lammers Gross Women's Voices and the Practice of Preaching is a more updated than the other one. And I find that I use it as a textbook, and it is really good. She has exercises in the back of the book for you to do to empower, to better empower your voice. Okay, I'll leave that up for a minute. Oh, and Luke Powery's book too. That is called, let me see if I can get on this. Yeah. It really is Sally Brown and that book is on preaching, and he has that whole thing on the embodied voice. So, and I'm just trying to, I think it's called Ways of the Word, Preaching for Your Time and Space, I believe is the, and Luke also has a whole chapter on prayer that's worth the cost of the book. That a preaching life is a prayerful life. And if you are not in a lot of prayer, the preaching is going to suffer from that.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so here is another question. If we are the image of God and have been given a soprano register voice, wouldn't lowering it give the impression we are not showing forth our uniqueness? Love that.
Well, I think that lowering it is part of just training for both men and women. Women don't naturally go up, because I have met like a Jewish woman I met in Israel, several of them, they would never go up. They have embodied, these Jewish women have these embodied voices, and Caribbean women have these embodied voices. So going up naturally is not necessarily the way we have been created. It's just we have been enculturated into that voice.
So here's a question I have, Dr. Johns. In light of this presentation on finding your voice, what are some things that women, especially in the Church of God, can do to flourish in this area? One thing you mentioned that I experience is that of not having female within the Church of God in my early years that I could go to that had a boardroom voice. When I first got on the board of the Black Ministerial Alliance here in Boston, I was one of 3 women in a board of 23, and the others were not Pentecostal at all. I was the first Pentecostal.
Mm-hmm.
And when they asked me to become vice president and I wanted to pray about it, I was also trying to find someone that I could speak to that was Pentecostal. And I just couldn't. And of course, as years evolved, serving on different boards, even within the Church of God, I see myself as a lot of times the only female in the room. And I think, again, it's because that voice, boardroom voice, is silent.
Yes, and that comes with enculturation training. We haven't naturally been invited into the boardrooms to develop the boardroom voice. So I would say that we have some remedial, like I had to do remedial work. And knowing that we don't have that voice, I would think studies in executive leadership, secular world helps, and finding a mentor who is someone like yourself now that can help women understand what that boardroom voice is, and that it is not to be hesitant, it's to be congenial, but not to be in the background. And um, women have been trained a lot sometimes to affirm the male voice rather than dialogue with the male voice. Write that down. We have been trained to affirm the male voice rather than dialogue with the male voice. Those are two different things. So the yeah, tell me more, and we're just sort of set it up. That doesn't work in a boardroom, whether it's a church board, denominational board, a business board of a company. Our voice has to be a dialogical voice. And if we chair, like since that terrible event years and years ago, I've chaired boards and committees, and I felt very comfortable doing it. But I had to recognize I had a deficit and I got to get help.
Amen. So affirming male voice rather than using your own voice. Was that what you said?
Yeah, well, we've been trained to affirm the male voice rather than dialogue with the male voice. And dialoguing is all part of a round table of a board, and that we have the space there that we occupy. And when you were given a space, like you're given on a boardroom, Dr. Hall is on the board of PTS. I heard, Dr. Hall, that you're chairing one of our subcommittees on the board, and there was some people linking in, a couple of students linking in, and they did a double take, kind of, they didn't do a good job of hiding their surprise when they saw that you were chairing that board meeting, subcommittee meeting. And for some of these guys, it's probably the first time in their life they had been in a meeting in the church chaired by a woman. I mean, they were good with it. It was fine, but it was a shock. They had a moment to gather themselves, that Dr. Hall was going to be chairing this meeting. She wasn't there to take notes.
I think the flip side of that too is that when you're coming from my perspective, we're not even prepared for the shock that's coming from the other side, because you don't always know that
Yeah.
what you're used to is not happening.
Yeah.
I will show up to preach at places, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll hear folks say, it's the first time we have had a female speaker. When I went to preach in Durban, Africa, they said I was the first Black female preacher to come from the United States. They've had
Wow.
white female preacher, and this is a black region, a Black church, and
Hmm.
you just don't know how to respond to some of that. Well, ladies, don't be shy. I think we have a few more minutes. Any questions that you can raise? It's a small class, so you can use your voice, unmute yourself, and ask your question.
Yeah.
Dr. Hall, thank you so much, first of all, for that message last night. It was fantastic. Is there any way I can go back and rewatch, first of all? Second of all, Dr. John, thank you so much. Great message today. I had posted, is there a mentorship program in development? Because I have I have my MDiv. I'm currently I'm a chaplain in Alabama. I'm a hospital chaplain and done CPE and everything. And so I struggle within our denomination to find like an older minister, female that, can connect with. you know, in some levels. So especially like in Alabama, it's difficult to find female ministers in Alabama. So, you know, is there a program like developed or
They were
developing?
talking about it, Dr. Hall. Didn't you recall that?
Correct. We are one of the plans in the work coming out of this um, Flourish conference. And there is, I will put the link in the chat. We're asking every one of you to complete it if you did not on last night, because we want to know who are those individuals that are willing to mentor and who are those that need to be mentor. And then we will really filter that, and we're planning on jumping on it right away.
Okay, very good.
So thank you for that question. And the service last night, my understanding is that it will be posted on our PTS Facebook and also YouTube. So if you have not yet joined our Facebook, I'll give you the correct name in a minute. Please do so. It will be posted. And Dr. John, we do have a few more questions in the chat. What are some specifics you learned and worked on to be a voice in the boardroom as well as in the pulpit? And I'll read the other. And is there a process for developing? Okay, I think that was Daniel, developing a mentorship program. Also, one of the options for pastoral authority development is CPE, clinical pastoral education. And one more voice on the topic of mentor. Should the mentor be male or female, or should I have mentor for my spiritual journey, female and male in ministerial journey? As a woman, do you believe our voice has something unique and special that we can share that maybe the male voice is not capable of?
Yeah, I'll start with the last one. We don't need to develop a male voice. And I've seen years ago, I would watch women preachers who seem to be trying to dress like a male and severe suiting and speak like men. I believe that we have embodied as women are unique. Therefore, our voice is always going to be more relational, lower, a higher octave, but being unique means that we have to also be human. And being human is what we haven't been allowed to be. We've been told that there's this biblical woman thing, but we haven't been told about what it means to be human. So I have a female voice, but I also am embodied human. And as a human, I have a fully adult human voice, and I need training just as men. As I said, men would get training in rhetoric. It was part of classical education. That training has been denied to women, and there's nothing wrong in training our voice, learning how to speak with clarity and authority. I don't want to cop out. Well, I'm a woman, I have a soft voice. Anyway, that's I think how I would answer that. And that there is this, in terms of cross-gendering mentoring, my own mentoring in the boardroom stuff, it had to be these older men who looked at me and said, she's pitiful and I'm going to help her. My husband is very good at cross-gender mentoring. He's received, when we pastored, numerous interns from Lee who were women or from PTS. He had them in the pulpit. He met with them regularly. He said, now I'm going to show you how to lead a small group. And now the next thing is how to visit the hospital and how. So he was really good at that. Some men don't feel comfortable with that. Others do. And there are more restrictions, I think, on the cross gender. But we do need women as well. And I've had some older women in my life, Joanne Lyon, who was the general superintendent of the Wesleyan Church, and is now retired from that. But she has been a mentor for me in terms of when I'm in a meeting and she's there, I watch her very carefully. And when I have questions and when I'm insecure or when I just need a shoulder to cry on, I have her number. So women to women is important too.
I think one thing I'll add to that is that doing my master's in urban ministry and my master's in divinity at Gordon Conwell, you were required to do two classes, mentor one and mentor two full classes in mentorship. And
Mhm.
you are assigned in mentor two, you're assigned to what Gordon Conwell called an approved mentor. And throughout that semester, you had to meet with that person at least twice per month. And so I am an approved mentor with Gordon Conwell now, and I have had both male and female. And there is just, I mean, it's like a course in itself in terms of how it is set up. You have to sign different waivers, confidential clauses. You need to work on something personally, something ministerially, something for the community, and they're just a well-rounded program. And I think when I do have MIP students at my church in DT, my husband and I, we use that process with them.
Oh, good.
So we're finding out now that some of the things they go back and talk about, we're trying to integrate it now in our MIP program. So it's really needed. It's really needed. And when I started seminary, I was pastoring for probably about 4 to 5 years, or if that much. And it was not a Church of God pastor. It was the then president of the Black Ministerial Alliance, who's a Baptist pastor. I wanted just to talk with him about how he's so engaged in the community. And when I had my one-on-one with him, he said to me at the end, Arlene, are you thinking of going back to seminary, going to seminary? And I'm like, no, I got 5 kids, praise Jesus. And he said, you need to.
Mm-hmm.
He said, for what God has for you, you need to. I'm calling. And he called the dean,
Oh, wow.
rector to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not encouraged by the many other leaders that I had in my life. So MIP for years was my seminary. And so now I'm the pitch, get to seminary. I teach MIP 3 times per year. And I said, don't allow this to be your end. There is PTS, join, sign up. So that is so important.
Yes,
I
I
think we have another, go ahead, Dr. John, and we think we have one more question.
no, go ahead. I like your question.
Though I do not have a pulpit ministry, God uses me in other means. This has been very helpful, understanding differences between authority and authoritative. Thank you. Can you say something more about that concept of authority versus authoritarian? I thought that was profound as well.
You know, that authoritarian, I think, stems from insecurity, whether it's in a male or a female. They're just heavy-handed, right? Just dictatorial. But authoritative comes from inside, and it's the unified, secure self, knowing that you're created by God and loved by God, and you can love well, but yet wear the mantle of authority well. And it's like when you walk into a room, do people feel safe? Do they feel secure? Do they feel anxious? And that kind of authoritative presence, I believe, is important. And there's a word that professionalism is a word that I like sometimes, and then I don't like it for ministry. I think that in some traditions, when clergy are over professionalized, but maybe I think our tradition needs more professionalism in clergy, and especially for women. We sometimes just get lumped in women's ministries with lay women, and which is great in itself, that group, but we are women clergy, we are professionals, and we need to be treated as professionals, like this meeting here about our unique needs. And then we need to be trained as professionals with that.